Starting talking to Ali in 2017.
She's okay.
Okay, everyone, we'll just give folks another few seconds to get in and get situated, and we will get started. If you are joining us from our last session, welcome back. And if you are, is this your first session for the day, welcome. And so we'll go ahead and get started. And again, welcome everyone, welcome back, welcome to the next session. And we are so happy to have everyone here with us, whether you're coming back, whether this is your first session for the day, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are in Seed Saving 101 Part 2 this time. It's being moderated by Jackie Pilati, and as you can see, our other presenters on the screen. And this session is part of the 2021 Northeast Organic Seed Conference. I'd like to let everyone know that we are recording at this moment so that you know that. The NOFA New York Winter Conference and the Northeast Organic Seed Conference, they join together every 2 years. You are participating in the third collaboration, which is very exciting. Please enjoy as many workshops in both the Seed Conference and the NOFA New York Winter Conference. I am just coming off of the NOFA Mass Winter Conference, so this is a great time to get some great information. My name is Anna Muhammad. I am the NOFA Mass Equity Director and Food Access Coordinator. For NOFA Mass, I am right next door to you in Massachusetts, Springfield, Massachusetts, which is Pecumtuck Nation. I work with community gardens and youth groups here in Springfield. I will be assisting as the Zoom Tech host for this workshop. And so if you have any tech issues, just feel free to use the chat to alert me. Now, if this was another time, if it wasn't COVID, we would probably drive in from certain places or fly in, take the train in, and come together at a conference center or a hotel, a little sleepy, a little bleary-eyed, giving hugs to those we haven't seen in a while, and meeting brand new faces and getting to know folks. But have no fear, even though we are in this technological world of Zoom, we're going to try and mimic that same feeling. So we're going to just utilize Zoom and make as much community as we can. What you're seeing in front of you now is our community agreement. So I'm just going to go through this very briefly. The community agreements are in your socio program book. Please look at those and refer to them throughout the week. We want to abide by these, so I'm not going to go into great detail. I'm just going to point out a few things. First, we want to be respectful, and we haven't had any problems with that, so I think we're good. Be curious, listen actively, ask questions when it's that time. And one mic, one voice at a time. So when you're called to ask a question, please ask your question. You can take yourself off of mute, ask your question, and put yourself back on mute so that everyone can continue to hear one another and listen actively and gain so much of this wonderful information. And then lastly, the other thing I really wanted to point out is that we are in the age of Zoom. We are in the age of using this wonderful technology that brings us together, but sometimes it fails. And so we're asking that you be patient with all of us as we navigate this, even the tech support, which technically is what I'm working as today, but just be patient and gracious as we navigate. As one tip for those who are not presenting or speaking, we find that if the cameras are turned off for a period of time, it does keep the bandwidth kind of fresh and keeps things going, especially if we have to play videos or anything like that. I want to talk a little bit about land acknowledgement. If you notice, I did mention where I am broadcasting from. Again, it's from Pecumtuck land. The slide that you're looking at now has a website which you could go to so that you can see the actual indigenous family that we are living on. This will show the different lands that were inhabited by our indigenous family before European colonization, before settlers came in and displaced many of these families. And So we want to take some time to locate where you are residing, what family was there, or what nation was there. And at this moment, we're going to take a few seconds of silence to honor our Indigenous family just for a moment, to offer silence of prayer or meditation or mindfulness. And so we'll do that at this time. We'd like to thank everyone who took that moment of silence and mindfulness with us. We will put this link in the chat throughout so that you have it handy. We will refer to it throughout the conference, and feel free to use it even when the conference is over. We also have, as part of the conference, In Living Color, virtual BIPOC or Black Indigenous People of Color spaces. It's being led by our In Living Color facilitators, Amanda David and Mandana Boucher. They have graciously assisted in this area. The opening ceremony was January 16th, but they will be available throughout the conference. They have daily open hours from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And then, as you can see, they'll have a closing ceremony January 23rd at 1 p.m. We do suggest take advantage if you need to. Their email is there anytime you want to check in and talk. It is a space for the BIPOC community, and feel free to use it. And I checked in their opening ceremony. It was wonderful. So feel free. They are available 24/7 via email. Keynote speakers will take place throughout the conference. Laura Lingnet was Saturday. She was the opening keynote address. She was very good. And from what I understand, her video or the video of that keynote is available in your program book. Banu, who presented last night, she was absolutely excellent, will be the keynote on Thursday. I really advise that everyone check out the keynote, and then we'll wrap up our week with Brian Caldwell. So please check out those keynotes during the conference. They are quite good. Our UVM note takers will be in each session. They will be taking notes and information as part of a needs assessment. Now, the notes will center on current and future priorities, opportunities, and challenges. Notes will not include any personal or identifiable information. The information will be compiled into a narrative in the coming months, which will be open to the public for comments and feedback from the Northeast Seed community. A lot of that information will be discussed in the needs assessment event, which will take place Sunday the 24th. We do encourage everyone to attend. We will put the link in the chat a couple of times so you can go ahead and register for that. It is free, so no worries. The UVM note takers, if they are in this session, I would ask if they can identify themselves in the chat, and they can also put the information about how to register for the needs assessment. So feel free to attend that, and we really encourage that you do attend. Now, a little bit more on the needs assessment day. Again, that day is dedicated to supporting the Northeast Organic Seed System and all of its diverse participants. And in collaboration with conference planners and the University of Vermont, the assessment will help identify the strengths and challenges and brainstorm some necessary ways to help build resilience in the region. And you see the session schedule here on this slide. So go ahead and make note of that. But again, you'll have the chat so that you can register. And as we are talking about free events, we know there are plenty of folks that may not have been able to attend this conference for financial means. And we hope that some were able to take advantage of the OREI grant supported scholarships that the Seed Conference and our UVM collaborators made available. And we are so happy and very grateful to be able to honor a series of free events during this conference. And that link that we're going to put in the chat that's talking about the needs assessment, please give that to folks so that they can attend a lot of the free events that are going to be offered. And it's a great selection. So please make sure you utilize that. They can also attend the meetups as well in the evening. All right, so without any Further from myself, I'm very excited, this being a continuation of part 2 from this morning, which was power-packed. Anybody who was in that session can bear witness to that. So definitely it's my honor to turn everything over now to Jackie, who will take us further. So Jackie, it's all yours at this point.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I did a quick little change here and went from corn earrings to plantain plátano earrings. So we're gonna check in a little bit for those. If you can either turn on your camera or let us know in the chat, but if you're coming from session 1, can you give us a hand up or a thumbs up so that we can get a gauge of how much overlap or not we have? Right, it looks like quite a few people. So we had initially, this session is going to be trying to cover a lot of content in this much time. So can you again let me know by either a thumbs up or in the chat or with a reaction, would you find it useful to be back into breakout groups to do introductions, or do you want to just move into it? So again, the question is, do you want to be in breakout groups for about 5 minutes to do intros into folks? If you do, you can give me a thumbs up. If you don't and you want to move on, you can give me a thumbs down. All right, it looks like we're not feeling the breakout group intro right now. All right, so a couple things before I share my screen. We're going to be dropping into the chat right now. I am a Google Doc that we're going to be using to take notes throughout the time. So if you can all click on that and open that up and just make sure you have access to that. And so part of what we wanted to do in this session is and this can be totally anonymous, you don't need to put a name down, but it's just for us, the facilitators, to get a sense of what are you hoping to take away from this session? If there's something specific you have a question about, we want to make sure that we can get a chance to address that. So that's what we would be talking about in our first breakout group. So if folks want to go ahead and put those intentions or those questions in that first part of that note-taking doc, that'd be really helpful for us because we'll be looking at that and referencing that later. So the second thing is, and I will share my screen now. So here's that doc. So it looks like folks are already putting in seed cleaning, etc. Let me just move this over. All right, so welcome to part 2 of Seed Saving 101. And I will just quickly intro myself, then I'll pass it over to Zainab and to Myra. So for the folks that joined me in part 1, my name is Jacqueline Pilati. I founded a seed library here in New York City called Reclaim Seed NYC. And we try to do a lot of work around education and workshops and keeping seed in community through building and sustaining a community-controlled seed supply. A little bit of background about me. I'm a science teacher turned seed grower. And so a lot of the work I do now is working with teachers throughout New York City about how to teach science outdoors, how to teach science with plants, building school gardens, and developing curricula around that. So I will pass it over to my dear friend Zainab to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zainab Mohammed. I am a farmer, seed keeper, seed grower from Newark, New Jersey. And currently I'm in Philly, apprenticing with Truelove Seeds. I didn't start off as a farmer or a seed keeper or anything like that, but I kind of found my way throughout the years. And I'm here now, and I'm happy to be here.
Myra.
Hi, everyone. My name is Myra Manning. I work at Row 7 Seeds. I've spent several years in the seed industry working in plant breeding, and currently coordinate with a lot of the plant breeders in our community, and also volunteering in some educational spheres, and enjoy gardening and cooking, and very importantly, eating. And so really excited to be here and to share with everybody.
All right. So this was our original kind of slide for what we were looking for in terms of the info to put on that Google Doc. So I'm going to skip over and just kind of talk about some of the session goals. We're hoping that you all can come away with confidence and skills to develop a plan for seed saving, have the ability to look at flowers with a seed saver's lens, and identify tools and resources that are within your reach, right? A lot of the things, if you are a beginning seed saver, which this workshop is geared towards, a lot of the tools and resources you already have. A lot of seed saving is going to happen in your kitchen. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the session when we talk about cleaning. So a couple of things, I just want to draw attention to the power dynamics of Zoom, being that it can come across very much as, there are experts that are talking at you, and we want to kind of stray away from the trap of expert culture and celebrity culture around this work. There is a tremendous amount of knowledge here right now in this space together. And so really encourage you to use the chat feature to share with each other, and also to just, if something we say or mention resonates with you, or there's something, a trick or a tool or a way that you've done something that you found helpful, please use the chat so that we can also learn from one another, and build community that way. You are your best teacher, right? These seeds and these plants are some of our best teachers. And like I said, we're going to be covering, to give you a brief overview, we're going to be covering kind of crop planning. We're going to talk about types of seed. We're going to talk about pollination, flower structures, and then we're going to be talking about harvesting and cleaning and storing. And so lots to cover in very little time. And so I just wanted to draw attention to some resources that have helped me, that you may be familiar with or not. And actually, I don't know if everyone can see. I can kind of just show. I can also list these in the chat later. But this is a beautifully illustrated book about seed saving in Spanish from the group Somos Semilla. They're based out of Mexico. And also there's a classic Seed to Seed by Suzanne Ashworth. You can get a lot of crop specific information from there. And the Seed Garden, also a staple, as well as lots of zines. This is one that I made with my friends at Queer Kitchen Brigade, a partnership through Reclaim Seed. And that zine and some other seed saving charts and resources that are in English and Spanish are on the Reclaim Seed website that you could download if you want. We're also going to be dropping links into the chat for you all as well. So let me just grab my notes quickly. So again, similar to session one, this is a workshop, not a webinar, although there's going to be a lot of talking in the beginning, but you may want some pen and paper to take notes. Let's see. And that's really it. So let's get right into the next one. So planning. I had my very first job teaching. I had a principal that told me that a failure to plan is a plan for failure. And that was something that always stuck with me. So having a plan at the very beginning of the season, about this time, so many of us are in this planning stage and seed ordering stage. And so here are some kind of things to keep in mind when you are doing that work. So, coming off fresh off of session one, intentions, obviously, we talked about this in greater depth. Things to ask yourself: are you growing and saving seed because you just want to have seed for next season? Maybe you're a contract grower, maybe it's about culture, maybe it's about preserving something that's rare. So having that really being the foundation of how you are coming to and showing up in your seed saving work. Knowing about your place, right? Every region has unique benefits and challenges, and that comes from things like the length of the season, what kind of soil you're working with, fluctuation in temperatures, what kind of precipitation. And obviously we know a lot of these things are changing for us and looking different over the years. What pests and diseases may be specific, to your region or problematic. And then this idea of pushing boundaries, which is kind of a plug for a session that's going to be upcoming on, I think, Tuesday afternoon. So if you look to the right there, I spoke about gandules in the first session, and there's a photo of some of the ones that I grew. And so this, for me, is the crop that really brought this pushing boundaries idea to the forefront for me, because having to grow it successfully here is very much pushing a boundary, given its home is the Caribbean. So these are things to think about as you think about crops and climate and all this stuff. So space, tricky for me as an urban grower. I kind of squat and take up all kinds of available lands, building gardens and managing gardens in the city. That's just the nature of it. We're always working in like some type of confinement, temporary space. So having a map and identifying what's being grown for food, what's being grown for seed, or both, those are important things that you want to identify as you create that map. Thinking about isolation distances and population size, which we're going to circle back to, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it right now. But basically knowing how many plants do you need to have in a given amount of space, and how far apart certain populations need to be, right, to avoid things like cross-pollination. And Myra's going to touch on more of why that's important later. So thinking about crop selection, you need to think about what are the things you're going to grow for seed? How is it pollinated? And I just put a quick note in there, self-pollinating annuals are generally the plants that I think are easiest for beginners. So things like lettuces, peas, and beans are generally the easiest to save seed from. So to talk about crop selection, and I may have brought this up in the first session, but it's all about relationships. And I return to that all the time, because just like people, plants have distinct personalities and needs and quirks and traits. And so in your seed keeping, seed saving work, these are things that you're going to start to learn as these traits and characteristics and personalities reveal themselves to you. So yes, it is, learning about, is this a sulfur or a crosser? How many plants need to be, what's the minimum amount that needs to be in this population size? How far does it need to be in terms of isolation distance? So these are the things that I'm talking about when I'm talking about the unique personality of the plants that you're going to be stewarding. And so working over time, these plants become your best teachers. So lastly, DTM, days to maturity, that is basically going to help you understand things like when to expect harvest, right? And also we know that harvesting for seed and harvesting for food can often be different. So things that can influence days to maturity are things like temperature, the zone that you're in, soil fertility. And that's also why it's so important to buy seed that's produced in your bioregion so that you can have a pretty reliable window to work with. And if you know me, you know I'm very passionate about keeping regional seed in regions. And this is one of the reasons why, among others. But having seed that's produced in your region, grown in your region, saved in your region, is much different than having seed that's coming from the West Coast, come over, assuming obviously that we're all growing in the Northeast. So in talking about different types of seed, so we have, and I'm just flipping my notes here. We're going to talk about open pollinated varieties, heirloom varieties, and land races. So open pollinated varieties are varieties that grow true to type, meaning that the offspring of those plants are going to look like their parents. They generally pollinate in the field. So they're pollinating by, natural means, wind, self, insects. And those are generally the varieties that most people that are saving seed from are working with. An heirloom variety, and you can drop in the chat, what are some of your favorite heirlooms to grow? I'd love to know. So heirlooms are varieties that have been saved for about 50 years or more, and they're usually an open pollinated variety that just has a story or a cultural significance attached to it. And a landrace is like the OG heirloom, right? So a landrace, and if you don't know what OG means, it means original gangsta. So land races are the plants that come with that energy that's just like, I said what I said, right? Like I expressed how I expressed, and they just kind of do their thing. And you're not going to get a lot of uniformity in terms of what the fruits look like, but you will get a stable yield from year to year. So I'll talk about hybrids a bit. So a hybrid is basically the offspring of a controlled cross. So you'll have two parent lines, and oftentimes those parent lines, oftentimes, thank you, Rebecca. I got a compliment, thank you, in the chat. So oftentimes those parent lines are inbred and they're patented. And so they're going to produce a very specific looking offspring. But the seeds that are saved from hybrids are not going to grow true to type. So when you grow them, when you plant them the following year, that offspring is going to express genetics from both its parents. And it's not going to look like what you initially had the year before, right? I think that's the easiest way to describe that. So you can save seed from a hybrid. And if you have time and space to take on a 7-year dehybridizing project, that's cool. But most people don't. And so that's why most people don't save seed from hybrids. But a lot of market growers feel pressure to use hybrids because they are seeds that are going to produce stable yields and be uniform. And so that's why they're appealing, right? Especially to folks who are under economic pressures to deliver. And so if you see on this slide, there's kind of like a pros and cons to some of these things. And that reminds me of Fruition Seeds, shout out to Petra and team. I don't know if anyone's here, but they have a great resource on their website as a blog. And I'm going to pull up the link and I'll put it in the chat. That is a seed glossary that they put together that kind of defines a lot of the terms that I just covered and some others you'll hear later, and gives advantages and disadvantages of each. And I think it's a great resource. I'm trying to work and figure out a way to make it available in Spanish. So that's something that I definitely recommend you check out to help inform your seed choices. So you may see here, and you can give me a thumbs up or a reaction if you've seen this chart before, but it's a favorite of mine to use in seed saving workshops. This is done by Seed Matters, and we're not sure if this is still living on their website, but like I said, on the Reclaim Seed NYC website, you can download the PDF of this. It's up there on the resources. So kind of pulling together all the things, all the terms that we just kind of covered, this chart I feel like does a nice way of delivering some information to you that's important to know as you're crop planning, right? So these are annuals, and here's some common examples. Gives you the Latin name. It tells you how this plant pollinates, right? So thinking back about understanding relationships with plants and what their needs are, understanding how a plant pollinates as a seed saver is critical. Understanding isolation distances, number of plants, so that's the minimum number that you would need. And I would have to check. I know the Seed Garden resource tells you minimum number just to like sustain genetics, and then there's another population number that is if you want to like keep a vibrant pool of diversity there. It also tells you seed life in terms of storage. But like these numbers, I like germinated 11-year-old nasturtium seeds one year just because I was like, let's see what happens. And it happened. So don't sleep on seed shelf life, right? Like these plants are magical, and they do some really beautiful things when we least expect them. And so to the right there, there are just some notes about, giving you indications of what can cross with what. And the way I like visually how this is set up, because also as you're growing and you're taking notes, this could be a good place to add in, based on your observations, what you're seeing, what you note about that plant, etc. So with that, I'm not sure if, I guess, Myra, I'll talk quickly about annuals and biennials.
Sure. I was just going to drop in those other charts that's similar. There's a couple of similar ones from Seed Savers, and then here are the two from Southern Exposure as well. And yeah, Jackie, wherever you leave off, I'll pick up.
Okay, so then maybe I'll stop here because I feel like it's a good segue into your piece. But I do want to say I really like the Seed Savers Exchange, Southern Exposure Seed Exchange charts, because they do offer them in Spanish as well. So just in terms of thinking about, language and communities that you're working with, having that as a resource is important. And so having said that, I'll turn it over to Myra to talk about annuals and biennials.
Thank you, Jackie. And I got a little nervous in my intro and neglected to mention that we're based in Westchester. I'm currently based in New York, Lenape, Wappinger land. And as Jackie was saying, it's really important to just develop these relationships with the plants and deeply understand these crops that you're working with and the unique parts, the life cycles, the ways of growing. And as a reminder, we're starting with some assumptions about, maybe some of these things, but in some cases, these assumptions might not be helpful. They might be unproductive. It really just depends on what your goals are for when you're saving these seeds. And remember that there are no rules in nature. and that you can save seeds of these things. And also as a follow-up for anybody who joined the holistic botany session and some of these other conversations, this is a really wonderful opportunity again to recognize that these binaries that we'll likely be sharing, and at least I will in this section, is not all that there is, that there's a whole world of plants and possibilities, and that our language is really limiting, and my language is limiting, and my lens is limiting, and I invite anybody to share other words for these things that they have. So with that, I'm going to talk about life cycles, so annuals and biennials, and pollination for the next few minutes. And so here is that chart that we were just looking at, and some of these other charts might be focused on annuals, which is a good place to start for seed saving, because annuals will complete their life cycle in 1 year. So when we're, as Jackie mentioned, when we're gardening or we're farming and we're thinking about harvesting for food, we might be thinking about a plant's life in terms of how long it takes to get to a leaf or a fruit that we're trying to harvest for food. And this invites us to really think beyond that, all the way to seed. So annuals will make seed in 1 year. On the other hand, biennials will take 2 years. And so in order for them to flower, and a lot of, so cabbage, carrots, a lot of other root crops, you need to kind of store them over winter. In the Northeast, they won't make it if you leave them outside in the winter, but if you store them in temperatures that are cool, that are above freezing, but under 40 degrees and high moisture, and then you plant them back out, you can get them to flower. They're a little bit more challenging. So let's just remember that annuals, 1 year, biennials, 2 years. There's a whole, many other types of life cycles in plants, but these are 2 big ones. And so just thinking ahead about that when you're putting your plans in place for seed saving. And as Jackie mentioned too, the idea of regional seeds and seeds that are varieties that are suited to this region would be important to think about as well. Next slide, great. Next, we should talk about pollination. So there are other columns on this chart of pollination, isolation, distance, number of plants. So for pollination, right? So for any seeds that we're saving, that indicates that the flower that that plant had, those flowers have been pollinated, those seeds have been fertilized. And so as you think about seed keeping, it's important to think about what has pollinated those seeds that you're keeping, right? So the pollen is that carrier of some genetics and traits, some extension of the plants themselves. And it's good to think about how far can that pollen travel? Was it from the same plant? Was it from a neighboring plant? Was it from your neighbor's plant? And so if your goal is to maintain a variety to be consistent, and you want to know what to expect the next time you plant it, you need to kind of be aware of how far the pollen of the crop that you're working with can travel. So let's look at a couple of flowers. You could go to the next slide. Great. So what is the difference between these flowers? Can you see where the pollen is, or where the seed producing parts are on these flowers? And so some flowers will have pollen producing parts. This flower in the middle here, you can kind of see the pollen in there. Some flowers have seed producing parts, and some flowers have both. And it's important to know your plants and observe what kind of flowers they have. And that's always a tool that you have at your disposal, is your power of observation and just really developing that relationship again. And so some of these, you can't really see the pollen or seed producing parts on them. And so when you look at flowers, maybe you're thinking, as you're thinking about saving seeds or keeping seeds, what would have pollinated this? And so for these big bright flowers that maybe smell really good, maybe they're trying to attract something to pollinate them, right? So these are squash flowers. They're pollinated by bees, right? By insects. So you can think about kind of how far will that insect carry pollen. You can go to the next slide. And then some other Oh, again, this is a cucumber, right? And you can see there's different kinds of flowers on this cucumber. But, you know, again, not all of these plants will fall into these categories. So it's just important to be aware of. You can go to the next one. Some plants also have very light pollen, and they have flowering parts that maybe wave in the wind, right? And so if that pollen flies easily, perhaps they rely on wind to carry their pollen, to do that pollination for them. And so with corn, you can go to the next one. Each kernel on an ear of corn has actually been pollinated by a pollen grain that lands on the silks, right? So that those silks will catch grains of pollen, and that'll develop every single kernel on that ear of corn. And so you can see the parts here, and that middle one there actually is a photo of teosinte, which is the ancestor of corn. And so this one, you know, when you're thinking about that, how far does wind potentially carry pollen? And you know, we'll come back to this idea of kind of isolation distance, but with corn, right, you might want some more distance between different varieties of corn in order to make sure that you're keeping the seeds that you want to be keeping, the traits that you want to be keeping. Go to the next slide. And then some flowers are enclosed so you can't see the pollen or the seed producing parts at all. And those, you know, might rely more on gravity, or might rely on just having their everything kind of contained and their reproductive parts closer together. And so in that case, you can maybe more likely know that it pollinated itself, and these are often called selfers. So you know that the pollen doesn't travel too far. This is a typical tomato flower, and it typically fits into this self-pollinating category. But if you can go to the next slide. Here are a couple of different types of tomato flowers. There's a lot of diversity within all of the crops that we work with, and all of the plant families that we work with. And so some, if you could go to the next one. Some tomato flowers also have pistils, or seed producing parts that actually protrude or come out of the flower, and that kind of encourages more cross pollination. So does that mean that you can't save seeds of these? Not at all. You can, certainly. It's just, you might want to be aware of this and think about, you know, how much space you might want to have between plants that you're trying to save seeds from. So next slide. To review, these are the different kinds of pollinations, types of pollination that your plants might have. And again, just reinforcing, it's important to know your plants, know what it is that you're saving, and plan ahead for that. Next slide. And as mentioned, that column next to pollination is isolation distance. Again, these are not absolute rules, but just good to keep in mind. So isolation distance just means, how far you want to keep your plants apart, or how far you might want to keep the populations of plants apart that you're trying to save seed from. So for wind pollinated plants, like if you look at corn on this chart, you can see, it says 1 to 2 miles. And there are, some studies of genetically modified corn that have suggested that that pollen can travel on the wind up to 10 miles, depending on the currents and things like that. And so those are good things to just kind of be aware of. And you can actually also separate corn and other plants by flowering times or by pollination times. So that's sometimes called like time isolation. But again, looking at this chart, if you look at the crops that all say self-pollination, those ones tend to have less isolation distance, right? Because you can kind of more likely know that the pollen is not traveling too far. And so you can see here for beans and lettuce, peas, that kind of thing. Tomatoes, these are all really good plants to start with. Next slide. So again, this is just to review, there's selfers or sometimes they're called inbreeders and outcrossers, which are sometimes just called crossers, cross-pollinators. And there's also this concept of inbreeding depression, which occurs in certain crop species and certain plants. So for corn, for example, because its pollen, flies on the wind, and this kind of goes back to what Jackie was talking about earlier with hybrids, right? So if you have too few number of plants of corn, it will result in what is often called inbreeding depression, where if it crosses with plants that are too genetically similar, it won't have as much vigor in the next generation. And so with hybrids, the way that those are developed is they will self-pollinate them and intentionally kind of keep them pollinating themselves. And you can see the two parent lines on either side, right, are smaller, and so they won't have as much kind of vigor in that next generation, and then they'll cross them together and create this hybrid vigor. Does that mean that you have to only have hybrid corn? Not at all. You can keep corn that has a little bit more diversity in the population, and you can have open pollinated corn, and you can just again kind of be mindful of the population size that you have, of the number of plants that you're keeping, in order to keep that kind of diversity in there, and also at the same time maintain the traits that are important to variety's identity, to what's important to you and to what you're intending to do. And it's just, these are just important things to think about. But again, just to reiterate, you can go to the next slide. There are just these are just kind of guidelines, and good kind of guidelines to look at and be aware of, but they're not rules. And if there are any questions, of course, keep adding them to the chat. We'll also have some time in a breakout later to talk about some kind of particulars of different crops and things like that. And with that, I will pass it to Zainab.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you, Jackie. So at this stage, say that your crops are successful. There are a few things to look for in choosing fruit and seed pods for seed saving. So these are some examples. On the left, there is a overripe zucchini. You want to look for color. You want to look for sometimes size when it comes to choosing fruits or seed pods for seed keeping. And so these are a few examples. Can we go to the next slide? And with that, there are two seed cleaning methods. The first one is for fruits that are wet in the inside, such as like the zucchini or cucumber or a bitter melon. And you would use fermentating and decanting for the wet seed processing. It takes up to like 3 to 4 days, depending, to fully ferment them in order to get the outer coating off of them. Also for wet seed processing, you don't always have to ferment. Something like ashwagandha or a ground cherry, you would use water, but you don't have to ferment them. So it's like a 3-step process. And also in seed cleaning, you don't need anything fancy. You don't need to necessarily buy anything. You can really just use anything you have in your kitchen, bowls, like you see here, bowls, knives, plates, brown paper bags you might have recycled. And for dry seed cleaning, we do a lot of things by hand sometimes. So in this picture, you see some folks shelling peas or shelling beans in a bowl. And we also use winnowing, which can be done with a large bowl or a tray and using just the wind or a fan if you have that. Also, we can go to the next slide. Here we have wet seed processing happening. And the first step in wet seed processing is removing the seeds. And you want to remove the seed. Here you see ashwagandha being seed processed in a bucket of water. And we do this because we want to remove the seed, and because of the size of the fruit, it's easier for this particular seed to be processed in water. And then, as you see on the last picture on the right, this is how we lay them out to dry. Next slide. This we have fermentating and decanting. So the process of fermentation is to, like I said, remove the outer coating off of any seed that may have some type of like gel outer coating. And this happens on a course of a few days. And then we usually put it in a strainer. And you can use, like I said, anything that you have in your house, a strainer, and it is rinsed off, and then you have clean seed. Here we have dry seed processing. 1 second though, I'm having a technical difficulty.
That can happen. So
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so here we have dry seed processing. And for peppers, sometimes if it's in a large quantity, you can use wet seed processing if it's in a very large quantity. So you would use something like a bucket, put the peppers in, and use either your feet or some type of large tool. Maybe it's a 2x4 from your backyard, because that's a technique that we use this season for large quantities of peppers. But this is also a method you can use by just getting bowls or a knife and just removing everything by hand. And also on the left is a technique that we use called winnowing to remove any excess chaff or any excess particles from when the seeds were being cleaned initially. We can go to the next slide. This is a video of another dry seed technique called threshing. And you can see Myra and Jackie tapping and also using some type of long, hard object to extract the seeds from this. I think it's tulsi or basil. And this just helps the seed, this helps the seed just fall down to the bucket or whatever you're using. And then from there, you can do like a second process of seed cleaning, whether that be through a machine if you have one, or winnowing, or using some type of mesh metal screen. And then again, can you go to the next slide? And then after your first initial process on the left, this is usually what it would look like, or it can look like something like you putting it on a plate. And you want to store these seeds in a dry, cool place where they won't be disturbed. You also want to separate the seeds that are alike. so that they're not disrupted or can mix with each other. You want to separate them so that they can stay, so that the seeds can not be mixed up. And on the right, we have seed storage. So you want to make sure that you put your seeds in a place that's dry and cool. And you can store your seeds in virtually anything, like a glass jar or Ziploc bags or airtight containers. It doesn't have to be anything expensive. You can really just use what you have. And I think that is one of the things about seed keeping that I like, and that I think a lot of people are attracted to, is that you don't really need too much to do this. You can really just use what you have. And that's very, very much enough.
All right, so I'm going to, a lot of the, so we were looking back at some of the goals and things that you were all interested in and had dropped in that Google Doc. And I think we addressed some of them here. If we haven't, certainly some of the resources that we're steering you towards definitely do. Some of you have asked about screens. I personally really like the screens from that Southern Exposure offer. They can be a little pricey, but they also, you can make them, right? So you can buy different size gauge of window screens and kind of make those frames. And that's actually a fun project to take on with if you're working with young people, or just for you on your own, and have them as something that you can keep and use year after year. But we wanted to give you all an opportunity to kind of talk, because again, we know there's a tremendous amount of expertise and knowledge and years of experience doing this here, together in this online community that we're in today. So we're going to go into breakout groups, and we would like you all to think about what are some of the successes and challenges that you experienced in the 2020 growing season. We all know that 2020 had some wild 2020 energy that a lot of people maybe don't want to, reflect on. But, and it's always important for us to find moments of opportunity to come together and support each other as a community, whether it's uplifting each other in our successes or helping each other through in our challenges. So I'm going to put us into some breakout groups, and we're going to have about I think 15 minutes. It seemed like 10 minutes was a bit too not enough time to get into some really meaningful conversations of depth. So we're going to be in groups of about 10, and you have about 15 minutes to reflect on this question and to share with one another. So we'll see you all back in a little bit. All right, folks, so we are slowly coming back together into the main room. Hope that you were all able to get into a little more depth with your peers here, our seed kin and community. So before we throw it out to y'all and ask if there's anything, folks who want to share with us in the main room, I wanted to touch on a couple of things. One is about language. We saw in the chat a lot of folks were asking about, things in different languages. And so, this is something that I'm very cognizant about and always interested in. And, I live in Queens in New York City, where in 108 square miles, there are over 135 languages spoken. And so if, we as a community want to work together on translating some things and offering things in different languages, if you are bilingual in another language, that's something definitely please reach out and be in touch about. 135 languages are spoken in the borough of Queens in New York City. Yes. So I'm, in my seed library work, this is the community, this is my community. And so having translations in Urdu, Mandarin, Russian, these are all things that I think it would be wonderful we could crowdsource and put together these resources for each other and have them be shared in some kind of open platform. So also resources, some folks were asking about tools. And so while you all were in the breakout rooms, I was collecting some artifacts, if you will, to show you. And so these are, I don't know if you can see this. These are the screens I was talking about from Southern Exposure. And so you can kind of see how these can be made, right? What I really like about them is that you can easily change the screens with the different gauges. So you could see there the difference, right? And that's gonna help in, so you can see this is a much finer gauge that would be used to winnow and separate some of the things, like I know someone brought up echinacea and things like that. And so you can kind of use two screens at the same time as well. I don't know if you can see that. And these are tools that you can make at home. Or do a workshop in and of itself on, right? There are tools out there. There's the seed aspirator. There's an open source plan. I can find a link to that and put that in the chat, but it's my dream to make like a few of those and incorporate them as part of the lending tool piece of the seed library. In terms of storage, the rest of my apartment looks kind of cute, right? But what you don't see are all the brown bags of seeds that I have. I have some lettuce seed in here. Like, this is real life, right? It's a lot of brown paper bags with labels and dates and a lot of things I have yet to get around to cleaning. So, again, we want you to kind of come into this really understanding that, like, the tools and resources are there. They're around you. You don't have to buy fancy gadgets, but just have a plan and have some discipline and, some friends to help you along the way. So all that being said, is there anyone who'd like to unmute and, share with us successes, challenges, tricks, tools, resources? I see a lot of you are dropping in the chat some, resources that everyone can kind of lean on.
Hello, my name's Chris from Ithaca, and I have a set of these harvest baskets. I'm cleaning seeds right now. As we speak, I'm doing some bean seeds because got to keep my hands busy. I think I got these from Gardener Supply, and this is the biggest one. It's huge. And then there's a smaller one. So this is all the pods I just cleaned out. And then there's a third one, but I really love these for cleaning seeds because I can take them outside on a windy day on my porch. And because they're not very heavy, I can easily winnow the beans from one side, one basket to another to blow the chaff away. I also harvest tomatoes, and other vegetables with them in the summer. I've had them for at least 20 years. So I'd say get yourself a good set of baskets and you'll have them for life for harvesting and seed cleaning.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, sometimes you just want to make like an initial investment, something that's going to continue to pay on. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else?
I have an immediate question since we have such a large brain trust gathered here. I'm trying to separate the seeds from the non-seed material here, and it's echinacea. And I think they both weigh the same, so I'm a little bit wary of putting them in one of these and blowing up with a hair dryer. Can anyone suggest any ways that I can clean these? That would be easier.
There's just some seeds like that you just like, oh, I really love you because I'm just sitting here for so long cleaning them. I find it's the little sticks that are left over, right? In the echinacea, I just cleaned it. And really part of it was patience, or I would just keep on shaking and the thinner little parts would just sort of move their way up. And then like I grabbed the tip. There's like this, that seed saver dance that we do with, yeah. So it's like, I don't have, and then screens, really, I think screens, like they're showing, I screen it as much as possible, but yeah, there's some seeds that are really, that one I just finished it and I found it very frustrating and hard, but I love it.
Thank you.
I think echinacea is always the one in seed cleaning workshops where people are like, am I in trouble that you are asking me to clean this seed? Like the prickliness of echinacea that teaches us boundaries. So yeah, thank you for adding to that. But so just looking closely, that the seed you want to save is actually kind of like that triangular structure that's like a light brownish, and everything else is chaff. So just to point that out there.
I also will say use one size mesh screen and make a first pass, and then kind of see what you've got. If all the seed fell through and only some chafe, then maybe select a different screen. And you may just have to go back and forth. And then I also have a couple of different sized battery operated fans that are really pretty gentle. And so you can try to, but it's, some people just got really, really good at cleaning certain types of seeds. And there is expertise in the seed community where some people say specialize in the echinacea and tithonia and, those plants that have those prickly seed heads, and other people are really good at cleaning different sorts of things. And, hopefully in the very near future, we begin finding all these connections between all the people that do have these areas of expertise where we can connect and keep sharing these resources. So if anyone does find that person who's good at echinacea, like broadcast it widely, because otherwise it is sitting there like a pharmacist with your tweezers and your little needles and but we love the seeds, so we want them clean.
I have a question.
Hi.
But if other person wants to, I just wanted to know if anyone had tricks for radish seeds. Like, do people harvest them when they're still green? I've done both, but I find them really painful to clean. So if anyone has tricks on that, and stratification is also a tricky one that sometimes I'm not sure. Like, it's clear to when I want to stratify, say like a nut seed, we have lots of black walnut, is I'll put it in wood chips and put it a bit wet and leave it in the garage because it's cold outside. But when it comes to like, say like milkweed or something like that, is putting, do I have to actually make the seed wet? And what's the balance between making the seed wet and it germinating when the days fluctuate so much now all the time that some days I'll be like like we're in Quebec and I haven't really seen snow until like we've seen it twice, one yesterday. And you know what I mean? The snow is this small. So the seeds right now, I know I'm throwing a lot, but I think it's stratification and radish seeds. So if anyone has either wants to shout me out in the chat or wants to answer here, that'd be great.
Hi, Tapreen. I just learned a really interesting method for winter sowing seeds that need stratification that I was not aware of. There's a woman and she runs some botanical gardens in Michigan. So she starts about 150 types of mostly pollinator plants. She's mostly doing ornamentals. So a lot of different types of milkweeds, a lot of perennials, some annuals. So she sows in milk jugs outside in the winter. So you take a milk jug. Oh no, looks like I got muted. Sorry. Was I muted the whole time or?
Yeah.
Oh,
You
geez.
ended at milk jug is when
Oh,
you
sorry. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I was talking and then suddenly I was muted. So you take a milk jug, you cut the top off, except you leave a hinge for it. So you can close it up again, fill it with potting mix, sow your perennial seeds on top, put the lid back on, no cap at the top, tape it up, label what it is, and then you just set it outside and it essentially acts like a little greenhouse all winter. If you don't have a lot of rain and snow, you might have to water it a few times through the opening at the top with the watering can. But the idea behind it is that the seeds are going through a very natural stratification process outside. They're freezing, they're thawing, water's coming in, and it really helps break open the seed coat. And then, so I saw a YouTube video about this and she had, like I said, about 150 jugs and she showed them in the spring once they start to germinate and fill in there. And she had them all open and it was amazing, the germination she was getting. And I've stratified outside in pots and it's really tough because you have to put hardware cloth or screen on top or the critters get them. So this protected them from rodents and the jug would get warm and warmer days and then cold. And yeah, she was getting phenomenal germination rates. So I would give that a try. And also you're not taking up your greenhouse space or stratifying seeds in your crisper drawer in your refrigerator, which is how I usually do it.
Sabrine, I want to add to that because Chris, that's amazing information and that's a really great way to start seeds when you actually want to grow them. Some of the wildlife and native plant centers have a lot of resources on which seeds need stratification, which seeds need vernalization, which seeds need a freeze and then to be dry. And those are all slightly different processes. And so like the Native Plant Trust has really good information. Some of the wildflower seed catalogs like Prairie Moon Seed, they have a lot of really great information on how to handle wildflower seeds. The other question that you raise about the radishes opens up the ability to answer a slightly larger question, and that is when you're saving seeds, you have to realize that there is often a difference between something that is ripe for culinary use and something that is ripe botanically. So for instance, your radish seeds, that they're truly out there, the plant has done everything that it intends to do for that seed when that pod begins to dry. Not when it's really green. Now you can harvest them green if a big storm's coming or, you know, for the next month, you're gonna have really wet, nasty conditions and you're gonna get all sorts of mold and mildew on that pod. You may need to harvest, but you'd harvest that whole plant early and bring it inside somewhere safe. But hopefully the seed pod itself has already started to get plump. But also think about things like cucumber, right? Like when the stage where you want to eat it is not the stage where you would really want to eat it, save seed from it, because a botanically ripe cucumber is much larger. It's orange. They have very, very tough skins. And so it takes a little bit of legwork, and some of those resources that Jackie put up earlier, like the seed garden. I saw John Navasio's book, The Organic Seed Grower, listed. A lot of really great information to look up, and it can be case specific, plant by plant.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. And I'm just gonna bring it back because we do have a harder stop this time around in terms of meeting time. But the Google Doc that you had all put intentions into and that we've been linking resources into is something we can continue to have conversations in. So again, Hannah, thank you for kind of ending us on that note, because it does really go back to this idea of relationships and variety specific and having the resources to get that information from, and having folks that you can ask questions with. So I'm going to pass it to Anna, because I think Anna is going to show us some information before we all end for the day.
Sure, no worries. Once again, we have been well fed 2 full days of some wonderful, wonderful information. And so I really encourage everyone, keep coming back for the week. We got a lot more coming, and Jackie and Myra and Zainab, beautiful, beautiful, wonderful presentations, a lot to learn. I just wanted to invite everyone. I did put the link to the survey in the chat. We just want to know how we're doing. So that we can better give information next season or next time that we're together. So please fill that out as well. Pushing Boundaries was the workshop that Jackie mentioned. That will be Thursday at 2 if folks are interested in that. So I don't have anything further. I don't know if there's any closing comments from Zainab or Myra or anyone before we close it out for the afternoon.
Oh, I wanted to show off the rice I grew in Philly. I'm in Philadelphia.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah. I shared it with my last group, but I forgot I had them in my fridge. I had them in my freezer. So I'm gonna try some next week.
That's nice. That's nice, brother. All right. Well, that is the wonderful note to close us out on. Thank you all so much for joining us for both session 1 and session 2. You all be well, be blessed, and we'll be seeing you sometime this week. All right.
Peace out.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, everybody. You're great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.